Welcome to the Ambient iPad. I had so much fun in the last jam with the setup using the Chamberlin sounds on the Mellotron and Fingerlab apps in AUM that I'm using the same setup again, but just some different instruments instead. It's a little more mellower, and also last time I said I wanted to do a short jam and the video ended up being 20 minutes. So let's see how quick we can get through this and to the jam. The signal chain is the Mellotron M4000D Mini. Its master mono analog output goes into a Boss volume pedal on the floor. The output from the volume pedal goes into a Boss RE202 Space Echo. And the stereo output from the Space Echo goes into a Universal Audio Volt 276 interface, communicates back and forth with the iPad Pro. Here's the setup. First thing I want to do is run through the sounds I'm going to use on the Mellotron. Last time I used the Chamberlin Music Master setup. This time I'm going to use the Chamberlin M1. And I've got about 3 different sounds that I'd like to use. I'm going to use a cello, which will sound like this. Now let me turn the effects off. Yeah, that's really getting crunchy there. All right, and then we're going to use the M1 female solo voice. With the effects, it'll sound like this. A little less on the repeats there. All right, let's turn that off. Then I'm going to also use the oboe. I love Mellotron oboe. And I've mentioned this before, I love trying to find spots for the bassoon. And where is the bassoon here? Oh, there we go. Let's turn the effects on. So just like the last setup, I'm not using any effects in AUM. For the Mellotron, it's just the Space Echo doing its Space Echo-y thing. And then for the AUM apps, it's the Fingerlab apps, it's just whatever effects I want to use within the application itself. So why don't we move over there? I'm going to turn this on. I've got a Mellowsound instance where we're using the violin ensemble, which is essentially the M403 violins. I've got the envelope, just a slight softening of the attack and a little on the decay there, the sustain, excuse me. For the effects, I have a little delay going and a little bit of reverb. So that's the Mellowsound Mellotron. Let me turn these off. All right, and then we've got iPhilicorda, which is Fingerlab's take on a Philips organ from the 1960s. Very, very classic 60s Farfisa type organ sound. The effects on this one, I'm using a phaser and a tape delay. This is just to juxtapose with the Mellotron in Mellowsound for a different type of pad sound. And then finally, I've got more of a sequence sound here, so let's turn off that, and I'll go through what's triggering all this in a second. So for the effects, again, I've got some phaser, I've got the delay, a little bit of vibrato on the front panel here, and also some reverb. Reverb's actually nice on this, so no reverb, jacked up all the way. So it's good to get, you can easily get a room reverb kind of into a hall. All right, let's get that down. So those are all the sounds. They're being triggered by, let's just get them all going here. Different instances of Bram Bos's Collider from the Rosetta suite. It's a D minor pentatonic scale that I'm using for this jam. So this is the Collider for the Mellotron in Mellowsound. Here's for that pad sound in iPhilicorda. And then finally, that kind of sequence. And how I'm really doing this here is by manipulating the clock division and the gate length, so that's why it seems a lot quicker, and it's more of that sequence sound here, whereas in the iPhilicorda example, that's just the pad, you can see those, you know, we're just moving, the hadrons are moving much slower. The gate length has changed. You can change the clock division. I've done other apps with Collider, and the focus is really on Fingerlab, so I don't want to get too far down into that. So I've got them all going. I think what I'll do is similar to last time. We'll just start with the Mellotron sound, and then I'll bring in some cello for this. Get the volume pedal going. Let me make sure everything's set. On the Space Echo, I am using the manual setting, which essentially means that wherever I have the knobs, that's the sound you're going to get. You can also store 4 different sounds, but right now it's just on the manual. So we've got some cello. I mentioned this before, but a lot of the Chamberlin sounds are much more high fidelity than the traditional, the Mellotron Mark I, Mark II, M400. They use better tapes, better studios, better microphones, although in many cases, the sounds that are on the Mellotron were licensed from Chamberlin, so they got the original tapes, but then they made copies, so that's how you get a lot of those idiosyncrasies within the Mellotron due to the tapes. All right, and then what we'll do is we'll bring in the pad, be a little more subtle in the actual jam, and then some female solo voice. Sure, that's... And then we'll bring in the second instance of iPhilicorda, which is more of that sequence sound. I'll probably fade these in and out. And then over this, we've got all 3 going, all 3 Fingerlab instances going, and then over this I would do the oboe. And then I'll fade out the mellow sound. So we've just got the organs going. And over this I might do some bassoon. This is where I would bring the bassoon in. Let's find it. I might fade out that sequence too. Do some bassoon just over that nice organy pad. Can raise the repeats on the Space Echo to start getting into some self-oscillation. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to end with, at least for me, kind of a very cool sound from the Chamberlin, the harp long arpeggio, which I've used in other instances. Now, it's not going to sound completely in key because the arpeggio is not a D minor pentatonic arpeggio, but you can hear the bassoon just kind of keep going from that oscillation. Raise that, play with some of the knobs, let's get more reverb, and then I might fade that out, keep that self-oscillation going, and then we can get the, okay, that's going to be a little too much here, let's lower that, and then we can get the kind of maybe raise that again so we go into self-oscillation with the harp long arpeggio. Let me stop playing and see where that takes us. All right. Just keep that going for a sec here. So again, the same setup, all completely different instruments. I did use different patches. on iPhilicorda as well. I tweaked Rosetta, the collider setup slightly, but not too much. And then again, using the Chamberlin M1 rather than the Music Master. Okay, that's going to go crazy. But Space Echo, Boss, they know what they're doing with that. All right, let me just reset everything up and I'll do the jam. I'll keep that self oscillation going. It'll fade out pretty quickly. I really like this setup with the Fingerlab apps. It does lend itself to a way more atmospheric ambient soundscape. And even though I do have Rosetta Collider triggering one of those instances of iPhilicorda in a sequence fashion, it's still very random and it just kind of has this mellow rhythmic quality in the background. But the atmospheric quality, I think, of that doesn't get lost. I really like using some of the Chamberlin sounds for more ambient pieces. They just sound slightly more realistic. The main reason being is that they used better tapes, better studios, better microphones than a lot of those Mellotron tapes. And a lot of the Mellotron tapes were licensed from Chamberlin, so there's successive generations of those tapes, which is why you get a lot of those darker qualities. For me, that comes through in something like the bassoon, which is a dark instrument to begin with, and it gets lost in the mix for some of the Mellotron examples, but that Chamberlin one cut right through. Obviously, it was a more mellow ambient piece as well. And then I just love that harp long arpeggio, even though it really wasn't in the right scale. But then having some of the self oscillation take over with that was pretty fun too. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and good luck with your own music.